what you've just said about the amount of detail that's required to execute your best performance, and the detail starts from months before. It's not just there is a checklist of maybe 20 or 30 things you need to be ticking off from months out. It's the training programs, the biggest one, but then you want to be getting everything else right. And the TriVelo athletes we saw do so well last week didn't perform so well because they're the best riders. They perform so well because of all these things. In fact, they're probably not the best riders throughout their group, but they were getting first, second, and thirds because of all these things added up. And
they're the best prepared.
Yeah, it starts from weeks out, getting their bike resurfaced, and then months out, making sure their bike fit is as accurate as possible, and they get used to the bike fit.
And not 1 week out from the race. So you haven't had time to get comfortable in that position, because your muscles are going to change the angle from the bike fit. So all of a sudden you're using different sections of your muscle, the hamstring attachment to the glute, because you've lifted your seat a centimetre. All of a sudden you're using a different angle. So these things are so crucial that, and also if you're not doing all those things now, you're not going to do it on the race.
Yep.
So it just formulates a habit of, this is important. So therefore I'm not going to avoid it.
Yep. And, we've spoken before about athletes taking the 1%ers to the extreme, doing altitude chant, getting their nutrition right. We had a lot of TriVelo athletes doing Dr. Harry's nutrition program. He was on the podcast last year, which, for a lot of athletes, they lose that extra 4 to 7 kilos, power to watt ratio skyrockets.
Yeah, and don't underestimate how important your nutrition is, not only for the weight you are on race day, but to give you the right fuel source to actually, when you're under pressure, to be using the right fuels. And if the body doesn't have that in it, it's like getting a petrol tank full of dirty fuel. The car doesn't function very well. Whereas if you've got the beautiful, clean fuel, your body is absolutely using all the resources it can from this great nutrition bank. The electrolyte levels are skyrocketed, your carb levels are fine. Your body's adapted to burning the right fuels in a high intensity race situation, because you've been training that method of fueling and training for literally months. And it's no coincidence that Julian's done that. He's lost X amount of weight. Grant's done exactly the same. Grant was the fastest time trialer in the whole Masters division on the day, and he's 45. And there were riders from 30 to 70 years of age. So, that was an outstanding performance. And Grant's gone from half doing it sort of thing, and I'm not being cruel, and Grant would know exactly what I'm talking about here, to totally committing himself to this outcome. And what a result. Of course the win is we're talking about here, but his improvement was just phenomenal, just because of those preparation things that he was willing to do to make the difference. And, up until then, he's a good solid rider, but he's a good solid rider, and so's 500 other good solid riders. What made him a better solid rider to be the fastest time trialer in Australia on that day was all the things that he was prepared to do. And, people say, oh, yeah, but he's always a good time trialer. Or Joe's won the last 2 or 3 years without losing a time trial. Yeah, but Joe's great. Well, Joe wasn't a time trialer 4 years ago. He was one of those really good solid riders. And he's turned himself around to be, and it's the expectation again that, that Joe should do that. But the reason Joe does it is not because he's the best rider and always has been. It's because he's the best prepared, and he's prepared to do what it takes.
It sounds like we harp on this, but there's a real reason for it. And again, I just can't underestimate this preparedness thing, because if you made a checklist of all the things we want our athletes to do, like we said before, there might be 20 or 30 things, and if you're only doing 10 of them, you're giving yourself 30% as much chance to perform well as the person that's doing 30. If you're only doing 5 of them, and we see plenty of examples of people, not ever riding the course before a time trial in cycling and triathlons, never going and do a course recon, missing some really key things that they should be doing. And if you're missing these things, you're just disadvantaging yourself compared to the person who's ticking all of them. And again, it comes to the conversation. Some people might say it's extreme, how, like the altitude, that kind of thing. How much do you really want to do? How much do you want to spend? But some of the costly ones you don't have to do, and we've spoken about this before. But there are some real fundamentals that don't cost money. They'll cost time and energy, like doing the course recon, studying the corners, that kind of thing. But if you're going to turn up to these events and you want to do as well as you can,
why wouldn't you give yourself more assistance? And the course recon's a tough one, because if you're doing a race in Cairns or Perth and you live in Tasmania, but you're going to go to the venue eventually, so get in the car and drive the course if you haven't got time to ride it. Mm-hmm. But get there early enough. I don't expect you to go and do a recon 3 weeks before if you live, 200k away from the event. And, we still did that for Ballarat. But, when you, for Geelong 70.3, you make sure that you're over the course the day before in your car, or if you get there 2 days earlier, you can ride it easily, sections of it, because it's a 245k loop. The run, you need to know the run course. You roll your bike over the 7k loops, or I think it's 11k, whatever it is. Depending on what the course is, you can find out about the course, and there's ways and means of doing it, even if you live miles away, to make sure that come race day you're familiar with where the turns are and where the hard parts are and where the potential wind is.
Yeah.
And to underestimate those key things is just giving yourself less opportunity to perform better than you would eventually do on the day.
Yeah. So the art of time trialing, a big section starts on how prepared you are before you even get to the race. And then there is so much in the execution. But talk me through the race plan side of time trialing and what you said to the athletes going into Ballarat, because it was a bit of different advice to what they're used to.
Yeah, and look, pretty much I said everything I've taught you about time trialing, kind of disregard for this particular event because of the course. The course they selected at Ballarat for the time trial, which is just not a normal time trial course. It's got technical sections, it's got fast downhills, unbelievably fast, dangerous corners. It's got a lot of turns, and it's got 2 really extreme hills. And you do that 3 times. You do that course 3 laps of the same course. So
extreme the hills were that you tested the course on a road bike and time trial bike just to make sure that the time trial bike was faster.
Yep, and the time trial bike was going to be faster with the downhill section. Yep. So what you might lose in the uphills on the lighter road bike, you certainly made up for it. And if you had the right gearing, so the next thing was to make sure you had the right gearing, but the plan for the course was not to ride it like a normal time trial, where I'm always saying keep it even, don't have spikes, especially for triathlon. We don't want to have spikes that are going to cost us energy and really cause us to falter in the run.